So just to say, there is a Q&A box that you're welcome to type the questions in. You could also put them in the chat, I guess, if you can't figure out the Q&A, and hopefully Caroline will pick them up for me. So we've had a few questions coming in already from the audience, as well as some sent in advance. And I think there's an interesting question to kick us off from some of our advanced questions, which is to I guess all of the teams. What would you say you have learnt from this process and from each other? So perhaps we'll go in the order that we heard the presenters. So Leandra and Melissa, what have you learnt from this process? And perhaps Susan, you could come in as well on this one. Who's going to be brave and go first?
Sorry. So from my perspective, I think that the main thing that we take from this collaborative interaction that we have is the power that the complementary areas have to help each other in many aspects. For instance, I think that the presence of an artist and the artistic output helps, on one hand, to improve communication of what we're doing, because it adds another layer of complexity in terms of how we are presenting what we're doing. But it also helps us to see what we are doing from a different perspective, which is extremely important. And it's even more important in the context that we are working now, because it's very easy to get focused in the very specifics of what we're doing. So if we can expand a little bit our horizons and see the issue that we are dealing with from several different perspectives, including the artistic perspective, it helped us to have a more holistic view of the issue, and with that, and we can use that to guide the questions that we're trying to, or to guide more specifically the questions that we're trying to answer. So I think that's an important take-home message from this interaction, from my perspective.
How about you, Melissa?
Wow, I think showing how adaptable we can be as a team through a pandemic was really amazing, and being able to have this platform, I don't know, it's just, I can't get my words out, but I think Leandro said what I wanted to say, but it's been really amazing to actually produce the work. Because I think throughout the pandemic, I was really worried that I wouldn't be able to make anything because of the restrictions and only meeting my collaborators once. But the power of actually hammering down and me asking every single question under the sun helped them kind of work with me in that way, if that makes sense. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. How about you, Susan, from a clinical perspective? Has this project made you think about things differently in any way?
It definitely does, because, you know, as a doctor, you get quite immune to the sort of the sort of cycle of your work and the people that you see, and people's stories are really, really important. And it's really allowed us to focus in on, you know, Mel's process to coming to diagnosis, and actually how terrifying that can be for, you know, young women up and down the country. So if we're able to develop something that allows the healthcare professionals and the doctors to have reassurance, so people don't have to have, you know, invasive procedures to help diagnose things, it's fantastic. And it's just really unique to have somebody that's going to be able to develop something that we're going to be able to use, not only, you know, through my work talking to doctors, but also with IIH UK and with the patients. And it's really trying to create that interface to say we're working really hard to try and inform everyone. And you know, we all know it's difficult as doctors to really reach down to people sometimes and engage them. So it's been a fantastic process.
Fantastic. So our second project was Danny and Pietro. So I guess the same question for both of you. What did you sort of learn from the process and perhaps about each other? Which I don't know, what a volunteer to go first. Maybe we'll start with Pietro first this time.
Yeah,
We'll have
sure.
an artist perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really helpful for me. It sort of made me reevaluate how I approach my practice and composition. I've always been interested in using, computation algorithm to move away, from linear approaches to making sounds, organizing sounds, and this. Working with Danny and the research group, it kind of brought more foundation to these approaches, which usually they're already quite on trend, making generative art, but having a solid foundation to build this on, it gives the work more meaning, and it gives more meaning to the art you make. And also I found interesting because I usually when I work on a piece, I just go straight to what I want to do, but working with research, it made me reevaluate how I approach composition, why I make those decisions, and having also someone else to work with, so that comes from a totally different practice. It sort of brings down this practice to the same level. The hierarchy is not there anymore, and it opened me up to collaborate with other practices as well.
Great, that's really interesting. Danny, how about from your side? Was this new to you? Had you ever worked with a sound engineer or someone in music before?
No, the only thing that I've ever done is the kind of sound files that Carol showed. So I make like these really clunky sound files to represent rhythms in the body, but they're nothing like this. I actually haven't had the pleasure of hearing all of Pietro's work yet. Somebody asked that in the Q&A.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, it's okay. But what really comes to mind for me is now is the sort of concept of harmony in the body. So thinking about rhythms in somebody who's kind of healthy and everything seems fine. And thinking about it as kind of being musical, in tune, sounds good. And then the idea that something like a stress or inflammation or something can then be represented as something dissonant, right? Something that doesn't sound right. It's loud or it's out of tune or something. And it's just a really interesting way of formulating that idea.
Yeah. I mean, during the talk, it kind of made me think about, obviously, we have these rhythms we expect to see, and this implies healthiness. But I did wonder whether Pietro's work could help us understand perhaps other rhythms we might observe that look abnormal to us clinically, but perhaps sound really nice. And so maybe actually we could have rhythms that we would currently classify as clinically abnormal that perhaps could be normal if conceived in this way. I don't know if you'd thought about this in your work at all.
Yeah, and also I think when it comes to sound, there is the element of the embodied experience. You kind of feel it in your bones, and I feel like translating these relationships that the guys did in their research to a physical vibration like sounds. It has gives a different impact to the research and the things that you're trying to explore.
Yeah, interesting. So let's move on to the third project, so to Myrig and Vicky. Shall we let Myrig go first this time, or we'll alternate between artists and scientists?
Cracking. Cheers, John. So I think for me, the really big thing that I learned and I gained from our collaboration was really having that chance to talk in such a prolonged way to someone that's actually dealt with hypothyroidism as a condition and has the ability and the insight to explore that looking back on it was super insightful, but also really drove a lot of the research questions that we came out with at the incubator. So we kind of went in with this idea of, can we mathematically model what the hormone system is doing? Can we think about the best way to treat it and get the hormones under control? Which is a very clinically driven way to approach the problem, and a very interesting question, a very valid question. But one thing that really came out of our discussions during the incubator was this idea of trying to give some sort of control back to the person with the condition. You know, can we give them an ability to understand what's going on while they're not coming in and out of hospital all the time? And that was really driven by Vicky's experiences and her insights into how hypothyroidism makes you feel like you've lost control, like you don't really have anything that you can do apart from when you get called in. So I think that's the main thing that I've gained from this collaboration.
Fascinating. How about you, Vicky?
Yeah, it was the major thing was the realization that the stuff that I've been going through actually for the condition was kind of normal, and having this really simple explanation of your fight or flight response turned up to maximum and left there, and that as a realization of, if you would say that to anybody, they would understand immediately what you're going through. Whereas I was very much in a situation where I was trying to explain myself, and like Melissa was saying about invisible illnesses, on the surface everybody thinks you're fine and there is nothing wrong with you. So they start looking for other reasons why you are behaving in this way. Things like drug abuse, things like severe mental health issues. And to be in a situation where it's kind of like, actually, no, it wasn't something that was wrong with me on a fundamental level. It was just this one tiny little gland that was overproducing and absolutely kind of feeding back into itself. And understanding from the clinician's point of view exactly how difficult that is to treat. Because when I got my diagnosis, I celebrated. I honestly thought, I have a diagnosis, everything will be all right now. And the thing that really broke me was the fact that it wasn't. And that I then had another 10 years before I got treated at the QE, before my thyroid problem was resolved. And so that element of an absolute absence of control, and then kind of being in a situation where, if at that time there had been something I could have done about it, there were actions I could have taken to facilitate my own treatment. If I'd have had that element of power, it shifts you from being a victim to being somebody who has a medical condition. And actually having a group of people to say those things out loud to, who understand it, was just absolutely wonderful, because you do feel like you're kind of an old woman on the bus going on about her bowels sometimes when you're talking about this stuff, and people are just kind of nodding and going, and so it was wonderful to be understood.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that was part of the reason why I ended up throwing so much into it, because it was a way of kind of trying to give something back to it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think your observation, rings true with so many people, that many people think the diagnosis is the end of the journey, but in reality, for many conditions, it's more the beginning of the journey. And, it's that expectation is really important, I think, to get right somehow. It's really interesting. Carol and Isabella. So Carol, perhaps we'll go to you first for this question, and then we'll take some from the audience.
Yeah, it was just great to work with, maths is something that I've always struggled with. So it was really interesting to be with people using maths all the time, which kind of blew my mind. And I guess it was very hard to even get my head around that. So yeah, I've learned a lot, and it kind of reminded me of simple things, I guess. Like I really enjoyed like, it sounds so silly, but making patterns and looking at these kind of tiny things to do with the body and just exploring those images. And yeah, I just really got a lot out of working with them as well. They were very giving in terms of like telling me about their processes, and we had a Slack channel, so that was super helpful. So I kind of saw the way that they worked, and yeah, it was really interesting.
Great. And how about you, Isabella?
Well, I love that. I love seeing her perspective on what we've been working on for, well, in my case, it's for actually years, because I've been working on this beta cells for even during my PhD. And now, but I always seen from either mathematical or experimental, clinical point of view. I totally missed the artistic point of view, which is wonderful. I mean, it makes you see exactly the same plot from in a totally different, under a totally different light. And it's wonderful because also she also gave us a visualization of what we're working on for like ever. So you actually see what you are modeling, what you are mathematically modeling, and having also somebody that tells you that fast and slow analysis is actually poetic. As a mathematician, that's just great. So yeah, I'm very glad for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I think it was Einstein that said that a mathematical model should be as simple as possible and no simpler. And, I think these ways of representing these problems artistically is actually a great way of thinking about how can we simplify the system whilst not making it too simple. And I think it's just great to see how you can bring these different approaches together to really understand a problem from a much more holistic perspective. So listen, we've got a few questions from the audience that I think it would be great to go into. The first one I might be able to sort of take myself with a bit of help from Caroline, which is, were the artists given any instructions, or was it really a carte blanche? And did the researchers have any direct role in the production of the end pieces? Perhaps Caroline and me can take the first part, and then we'll throw it open to the researchers to say whether they were allowed to get their hands dirty, so to speak. So I guess in terms of how we selected the projects, we had a call out for scientific proposals that brought together people with backgrounds in mathematics, computer science and physics with those from either biomedical or clinical sciences. And we had a committee of experts assess those proposals for their scientific merit. And at the same time, we had our research fellows comment on them for the skills gaps that the researchers identified as being necessary to fill in order to take the projects forward. And we graded them on both those bases and selected a number of projects. So in the last round, we had actually 6 projects that were taken into the incubator. And then once we completed that part of the process, we then had a call out where we put each of those project descriptions out through various channels, inviting artists who might be interested to take part. And Caroline, do you want to say a little bit more about the process we undertook to select the final 4 projects and the artists involved?
Absolutely, John. So yeah, as John discussed, we used the lay summaries from each of those projects as the basis for expressions of interest. So really the idea was to talk about what the projects were about, and ask the artists that might be interested to provide us an expression of interest with whichever project it was resonated with them. So we had more expressions of interest than we ended up taking on. So we had 6 projects, and we had several artists get in touch saying that whichever project resonated with them. And ultimately we went for the 4 artists that we've got now, because they were the ones that were really able to communicate why it was that those projects interested them and what it was that they wanted to do as part of those projects. But we made it very, very clear, hopefully the artists will back me up here in saying that whatever proposal they put together in terms of an expression of interest, that wasn't, you know, that wasn't the end. It wasn't like that's what you're committed to. As part of the incubator process, we go through 2 days where all the researchers, all the artists, all professional services people like me, people who work in finance, all kinds of people who work at university to make research happen, get together for 2 days. And we use that time to basically thrash out those projects. So we've got the initial proposals, but then we get everybody into the room and we actually finalize the look of that. So in that sense, in a way, we were really able to co-produce the research and also the artwork, because whilst we had some initial expressions of interest to kind of get people together who've got vaguely sort of similar interests, we didn't dictate as far as what the project should look like or what type of artistic outputs we were looking for. So we left it very free in that sense.
And I think you make a really good point, Caroline, that in that incubator, that's where we encourage all the teams to reimagine their projects. You know, we say, you've got this far in the process, you've written down what you plan to do, but actually let's reevaluate whether that's still the best plan, whether the expertise and insight of people that have now been brought together means that a different direction should be taken, and we encourage that. And as Caroline mentioned, we have all of our professional services team to work with all of the teams to actually finalize a set of objectives that can be delivered in the project timeframe that will put the projects on the best possible foundation with which to build future success. And I mean, from what we've seen, certainly on the artistic side, they've been fantastically successful. Now, the second part of this question was sort of aimed at the researchers, which was, you know, did you have any role in the production of the end pieces? So Myrig, were you able to sort of design those dice or something like this? You know, how did it all work from your perspective, researchers? Anyone chip in?
Well, since you come to me, I'll jump in. I think there was a lot of discussion that we had with Vicky. So I mean, it was all very much driven by her and what she wanted to do and her ideas, but particularly around the board game and the dice. And this idea of bringing some sort of idea of randomness into how we treat. Definitely, we explored together, which was really interesting. I wouldn't say we necessarily got our hands dirty. I think also the pandemic kind of got in the way of a lot of that, but it was definitely a great thing to be a part of from a kind of brainstorming sort of perspective.
Anyone else got any observations from their involvement?
Can I just say, John, that I think that in this context, one of the most interesting things from my perspective is how organic was the interaction. So when we relate to the first part of the question as well, when they asked if there was any script, actually we were basically just put together, and then we understood the context, and what we did was to work together from that. And I think that this is good learning as well, in the sense of this is very encouraging, because it shows that we don't need to do anything too fancy in order to put clinicians, scientists, and artists to work together. I mean, just sitting us together and putting a bunch of people that are reasonably open-minded together, and give an initial push, which is the minimal catalyst of just putting us together and allowing us to have the opportunity to talk to each other. It's more than enough. Look at what we managed to get from that. And from the second part of the question, as Myrig said, COVID came in the middle of getting our hands dirty, but there has been a lot of discussion, and it's interesting because I personally can see a lot of what we have been done from our side in Mel's work.
Yeah. I think you make a great point. I always think that interdisciplinarity is a state of mind more than anything else, and our people, you know, coming together from different backgrounds with a mindset to learn and understand from each other, or not, because you can actually get people from different backgrounds together, but it may not work effectively. And I think one of the things that we really work hard on in the centre is to bring together people and to create the environment where people are encouraged to explore and learn from each other and to take risks. You know, as you say, we didn't sort of have any predefined expectations or or outcomes in mind. It was more, you know, see where your imagination takes you, and let's empower you to deliver. Do you have any other observations, Isa or Danny, before we move on to another question?
I'm not a researcher, but I think...
Yeah, but you can come in as well, Pietro, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys didn't get your hands dirty in a way physically, but I found my work really changed as we had meetings, and the researchers' participation was more in the way they developing their work. By developing their work, they were developing my work as well, because mine was changing accordingly. And I felt every time we had a meeting, mine was changing structure, my composition was going in a direction and then the other. And then at the end, my composition went in a way, and then the research, we went in another, because mine was still working on the first assumption that we had at the seed core meeting. So mine sort of lives in a bit of a parallel universe in the research. They're there, but they're slightly at different angles.
Yeah. One thing we should say, I think Caroline's highlighted it in the chat, but just to say, we will be having a new round of CCORM projects later on this year. We're planning to start them in the autumn, when we hope that the pandemic will have subsided to the extent that we can spend some time together, at least vaguely close proximity. And we'll be having another call out for artists in residence, both for our CCORM projects, but also some of the team's work directly of relevance to epilepsy. We have some money specifically to support artistic outputs in the context of epilepsy. So we'll also be advertising for that at the same time. So it'll probably be a call out over the summer, late summer, in time to start in the autumn. So if any of you out there are interested in joining us for the next round, then do please get in touch with us. I'm going to move on to a question from Louise Lyons. This one's aimed at the artists, and just asks around how do you feel we can best communicate physical experiences and biological events which are universal through personal / artistic expression? Well, what are your thoughts on the best way to go about that? Anyone can jump in, or I can pick on someone. Carol, why don't you jump in? I could see you were sort of itching to say something. So
no. Well, I guess it was interesting hearing from the other artists that had personal relationship, had personal experience of some of these things, but because I didn't, myself. So obviously it was very different for me, I'm sure, because I didn't have that personal experience. But then, yeah, so it was kind of interesting to see that they approached it from that perspective. That was from my point of view, what I kind of noticed. But did
you think it was? Did you find that was tricky for you? I mean, not having diabetes yourself and working on a project with diabetes, or did you find actually that enabled you to perhaps come at the problem from a slightly different perspective?
Yeah, I think I definitely came at it from, I changed what I was kind of going to do, but it wasn't that I just got rid of the diabetes, that wasn't it, but I guess what it was I was kind of intrigued by how we were talking at the start, that like, instead of focusing on the problem that might be happening, that I could still celebrate the pancreas and all the activity in it, and then it could still maybe be relevant for people that might have diabetes or whatever. But I didn't focus on that aspect of it, I guess. No.
Right, thank you, Vicky. Do you have any thoughts from your perspective?
Well. Because that's the thing, it's been really interesting being in a situation where you have people who both have lived experience and people who don't have that lived experience. And I think that one of the things that artists do is whenever they're presented with something, they find something in it. They find a thread that they then follow. It's like finding a little tune that gets lodged in your head. And I think that when you're approaching something where to truly understand the research and to truly understand how to treat these things, you do need a level of expertise. When you're coming at it from a lay perspective, when you see those little patterns and you see those and you hear those little tunes, to then follow them and see and allow yourself to follow them and see where they lead you, because they lead you in these directions that you don't expect. I wasn't expecting to be making a relatively convoluted dice game. Talking about the researchers getting their hands dirty, I believe that I had an interesting conversation with Myrig, Vicky and Dave at the start of all of this about getting us all actual replica Greek shields and running at each other with them, which I think they were quite glad didn't happen. When you are making work about something like this and trying to expand that level of understanding with people who don't necessarily have any experience with it, there's an element of sincerity that you kind of have to have, and you have to try to avoid pretending that you know more than you do. So whereas me and Melissa have a very definite lived experience, so we can relate things because of our own experience, Carol and Pietro have done absolutely amazing work because they haven't had that advantage, but equally they've had an entirely clear perspective, so they've gone at it and they've been able to see the things that we wouldn't be, that me and Melissa wouldn't, because we're very focused on expressing our own experience, because that's a way of actually getting people to relate to it in a very different way.
Yes, fantastic. That's really interesting. And Melissa, from your experience, do you have some comments?
Yeah, I mean, it was really a reassuring time, because when I was diagnosed in 2018, I think, I didn't know what the condition was, and I didn't know that there was a community of people until a year after my diagnosis. So you can imagine the mental health not being great, actually terrible, and just not having, like, feeling completely alone. So when I finally took charge of this condition, I was like, okay, I need to reach out to others who have this and find the lead ophthalmologist and neurologist in the UK for IIH, which I've done, and try and produce a body of work to communicate this illness, which is on the rise in the UK. It's been, I can't believe from the diagnosis to where I am now, I can't believe that has happened. And, you know, I still pinch myself because it's so important. And I think what Vicky was saying about us being, having a different perspective, I think it's a good thing to have some emotion involved, because all people want is empathy, don't they? And I think that is lacking with disorders that are invisible, and I'm trying to make that change in that way of thinking.
Well, I think if this is just considered the start of the journey, it's been an incredible start from you, Melissa, and
Yeah,
you know, I think it's going to go to great places.
Mm-hmm.
Pietro, do you have any thoughts?
Yes. Yeah, I'm following what Vicky, Melissa, and Carol were saying. I think my approach, since I don't have lived experience of heart surgery, is different. I approach it more analytical way, and it's less. I think it's less expressive in that way, because there is less of my own of my feelings and emotions in it. And for the fact as well that to compose, I use algorithms and computation. It detaches me more as well, I think. But I that's what I like to do as well. And I think also, it's not to relate to the question, but I think what artists do, but it's very similar to what scientists do. We all come to displace us, with our creative ideas, and we are preconception and biases. And so even the researchers have approached this with their own emotional connection to them on a different level, on a different scale. But our practices are very similar, I think.
In fact, that's a good segue into the next question to take, which is from Deborah Davis, and that's aimed at the mathematicians. And I suppose it's a similar question, but from the sort of scientific perspective. Have you, as mathematicians, as scientists, felt that you've been given inspiration as a result of interacting with this in this totally different way of thinking? Has it given you sort of new insights into your own research? And perhaps while you're thinking about that, I might just draw on my own experience of using my chair's privilege of working with Paul Jepson and developing a piece of theatre around our research that used mathematical modelling in the context of epilepsy diagnosis. And I found that experience incredibly valuable. And in fact, I found myself looking at our models in a totally different light as a result of it. So what had happened there was for a very similar, I guess, process that Vicky described, the idea we first started off with, it was absolutely nothing like what we ended up with. So I think originally the plan was to essentially try and sort of create an audience situation where the audience would get distracted from the play that was going on. And this was designed to sort of reflect a seizure happening in the audience. And there would be various people planted in the audience to distract things. It was a crazy idea, and we explored whether it could work and concluded that in a theatre of 400 people, it would be really tricky. And in the end, we ended up stumbling across this idea that actually the network models that we were using could be represented by the players as specific brain regions and the connections between them that governed how they could interact with each other. And what was fascinating about this was when I watched these scenes, so they were basically ad-libbed scenes, but with these specific rules that were governed by the mathematical model that determined whether or not people could interact with each other and in which way they could. Some of the behaviors that we'd seen in the model that we couldn't really explain entirely clearly just came out so naturally, and you could understand from seeing how these individuals were interacting with each other what it was about the network structure that was determining these interactions in a way that just looking at the output of the model on a computer screen just didn't facilitate, at least not for me. So I found that incredibly valuable, and it led to me looking at our models in quite different ways. So what about the rest of us? I mean, who shall I pick on? Maybe Isabella to go first. I mean, what was your experience of interacting with Carol in this way?
In our case, I think it was more about, let's say, visualization. So Carol gave us more an insight of how we can actually see those things. So we talk about in the mathematical model, we go a little bit more in details because we look at things that you actually, well, they're a little bit more complicated to visualize, but her work gave us some hints. So a way to think of what you're working on. So I think this is what I got mostly, is just his, how can I explain? Is yeah, just think of what you are actually modeling. They are not just numbers; they are cells. So, and the old idea of cells working together and everything, it's great. I mean, it's a great idea, but when you see it, it's even better. So,
yeah, fascinating.
It is.
Who's going to go next? Anyone want to jump in?
Well, I can just say that it's really the answer to this question is very similar to the answer to the first question, that I'm really fascinated by sound representing rhythms in the body, and the concept of dissonance sounding well, as representing kind of dysregulation problems in the body. So I won't go on because I've already said it, but that's what's really interesting to me, and I'll keep that.
Yeah,
as well.
Fantastic. Myrig.
Yeah, so again, for me, it comes kind of back, as Danny, to what I was saying in the first question, which is kind of moving around from thinking about how to model what's going on in the body to thinking about how can we use the things that patients or people with the lived experience can model themselves and register themselves, like heart rate, like sleep with something like an Apple Watch. And how can we use those to pick out what's going on inside the body? So really kind of turning the problem on its head was the thing that we really learned.
Yeah. Leandro, any final observations from you?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that what everybody said in terms of the inspiration, it's really interesting to have this different perspective. But I think that in our case, working with Melissa, there was also another level because she has lived experience of popular edema and IH. It's not just inspiration, but also motivation, because you see what you're doing differently when you understand the impact of what you're doing. So sometimes you focus on the classification accuracy of your algorithm, and you want to go from 70 to 80%, and but if you take a step back and you understand what that really means, how many people would not have a long needle being stuck in their spine because of what you're doing. This motivates you to work and to see your work in a very different way.
And perhaps finally, Susan, I know we sort of asked you from the clinical perspective at the beginning, but from a scientific perspective, you're someone who's obviously published a lot of research papers alongside your clinical work. Has it given your sort of research a sort of new direction or new insights into the research you're undertaking?
Yeah, I think we've been always quite focused in Birmingham on including, the patients in how we approach research. But I think this dimension is actually trying to, and what Mel's doing and what we're doing for the future is trying to take it out to the public and accessing people that don't necessarily come to hospitals or things like that. Because that's important. It's that sort of more public health message to people, and as I think a lot of the artists have said, is that sort of unseen disability of disease for individuals to know that not necessarily people that have to go to hospital. So I think that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, fantastic. So listen, I think we've probably got time for one more question, and the question I'm going to choose is actually one that will be useful for our own learning as we take this scheme forward, and it's from Carl Wedgwood, who asked the artists, what did you find most challenging about your projects, and were the challenges faced here different to ones you might typically face working on other projects? I guess he's getting at other projects not involving scientists, etc. So I don't know which of you might like to take that one first. Looks like Vicky's kind of come in. Great.
I think that for all of the artists, the number one challenge was COVID. Because unfortunately that absolutely changed how the project panned out. So whereas I was really looking forward to being able to work with the clinical data, I was really looking forward to having those conversations. One of the things that I really wanted from this project was to be able to be part of those conversations. Because of COVID, it made that basically impossible. So as far as that went, and I feel really bad going first because I know that for all of the artists that has been, and for the researchers, that has been an absolute kick in the posterior. And it's had to make us all completely rethink how we approach both the research projects themselves and the artwork we've made about it. But yeah, basically, in my own terms, not being able to spend as much time actually with the researchers as I would have liked, but unfortunately there's nothing that can be done about that.
I know. Melissa, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I have to agree with Vicky. It's kind of similar experience. The pandemic was balls, to be honest. It wasn't great at all, and I just think how well everyone's adapted to it. I was definitely missing the collaboration aspect. I always do collaboration projects, so actually not having that organic kind of question asking, it was better for me to go away and think of the questions and come back rather than just reeling everything out. So in that way, it's changed my practice quite a bit to think about different kind of outputs, and my work is going very towards the digital realm and VR and AI and 3D modeling, and I don't think it would have done that if there wasn't a pandemic. So I'm not saying it's a blessing in disguise that loads of people died, but I'm just saying that it's changed the way that I've managed to do my work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's a testimony to all of you, the way that you've managed to overcome adversity in the last year to actually produce these amazing works, and to actually, you know, we're going to be able to exhibit them online, which is not something I ever thought we'd be able to do. And although obviously that's not going to be quite the same as seeing them in real life, it actually does open up your work to a far wider audience in some sense. Yeah, whereas, definitely, you know, people around the world can hit the link and see the amazing work that you've done. Carol or Pietro, do you have any thoughts on challenges and perhaps how this project's contrasted to other work you've been involved in over the past few months?
I think, yeah, from my own perspective, since my practice is sound-based, it was very challenging because you miss that live element, especially because my piece is generated in real time, so it doesn't just exist as a file, it exists as an algorithm. So there was big part that is missing, and but also just working with researchers, that I found what was harder compared to my other project is that I wanted to give justice to the research that was being made, so there was the extra pressure I was putting on myself. But on another level, it was sort of a relief as well, because sometimes I put too much pressure on my own ambitions, and having a research to support me was sort of a relief as well. Clear out my mind and just, oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm doing something towards this goal. And so in a way it was challenging, but also a relief.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Carol, how about you?
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, I found lots of things challenging. I found, like, I don't know, I think I spent a lot of time worrying about how or who it would be for, instead of actually just making more things. And also I think the pandemic did kind of change the way I was going to do it, because I've been recently doing kind of more sculptural with a mix of like video, and I had gotten a wooden structure made that I was going to have video, and I was going to do patterns and make a kind of a world that I was talking about. I really wanted to make a kind of environment that you could go into and you could, you know, pick up parts of this and like see different parts and have video. So yeah, I was a bit sad that it was going to be digital, but then in other ways it was good, because it made me focus, as I said, on different aspects of it. And so now I actually feel like in some ways I'm just beginning, because I feel like I will continue to work with these types of images, and we had an interesting discussion about copyright. And yeah, I think I feel like in some ways I've just started. So yeah, it's good and bad.
Fantastic. Well, listen, everybody, our time together is, I'm afraid, just about up. I'd just like to thank, first of all of our presenters. You gave some incredible talks. You know, we really got to learn something both about the science and about the artistic process and outputs. I'd like to obviously thank all of our audience for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you taking the time out to come and join us online. I'd also like to personally thank Caroline Gillett, who has been the maestro behind the scenes, who's not only made tonight happen, but whose tireless energy throughout the whole process has enabled all of our teams to work so effectively together. So thank you so much, Caroline. Just before we go, I perhaps will hand the floor to you, so you can perhaps just tell us a little bit about how we can see some of the great works that the artists have actually produced.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the chat, I am circulating right now, and I'll also send it to everybody who's registered via an email in the next day or so too. It would help if I unmuted myself. Sorry about that. Just to say thank you for everybody who's attended. And before you go, please do give us feedback, because it helps us to show that events and activities like this have value. So and also to make improvements for future iterations of the artist in residency and events like this. So please do leave your feedback before you go. But I thought I would just very rapidly screen share, if I can, just to give you a little sneak peek of the virtual gallery that the artists have put together. So we do really encourage you to go have a look. Hopefully you can see my screen, nod if you can. Great, perfect. So we've created a virtual exhibition, because obviously we couldn't do a physical one. So we'd really encourage you to take a look at that. This just shows you a couple of screenshots of what it looks like. So do have a wander through, and yeah, we look forward to your feedback, both for the event and for the exhibition. And hopefully, you know, we'll have the artists back to talk further about their work in the future, perhaps. But all remains to be said is to basically thank you for your attendance, and yeah, good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.